You ever notice how everyone's obsessed with self-awareness these days? Like it's this magic pill that'll fix your entire life? Well, I'm about to tell you why that's complete garbage. Because here's the thing nobody talks about. Being self-aware can actually make your life worse, way worse, and I'm going to prove it to you. Look, I used to think the same way. I thought if I just understood myself better, if I could identify all my flaws and weaknesses, then boom. Problem solved, right? I'd be this perfectly optimized human being, but that's not what happened at all. Instead, I became completely paralyzed. I'd analyze every single decision to death. I'd second-guess everything I did. And the more I learned about myself, the more trapped I felt. So today we're diving into something most people are too scared to admit, that self-awareness has a seriously dark side. And if you're not careful, it'll destroy you from the inside out. Now, before we get into this, I want to be clear about something. I'm not saying self-awareness is bad. I'm saying that most people are using it completely wrong. And that's causing real damage. Think about it like this. Imagine you're walking through your day, just living your life. Then suddenly, you become aware of every breath you take, every blink, every tiny movement your body makes. Sounds exhausting, right? That's because it is. And that's exactly what happens when you become too self-aware. You start watching yourself like you're some kind of science experiment. You stop living and start observing. I see this all the time with people who've gone deep into personal development. They read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, do all the therapy and journaling, and they can tell you exactly why they do what they do. But here's the kicker. They still do it. They still make the same mistakes. They still fall into the same patterns. The only difference is now they have a front row seat to their own dysfunction. It's like being trapped in a glass box where you can see everything wrong with you, but you can't actually change it. You're just stuck there, watching yourself fail in high definition. And this creates what I call the self-awareness trap. It's this weird paradox where the more you know about yourself, the less you're able to actually do anything about it. Because knowledge without action is just entertainment. It's just mental masturbation that makes you feel productive without actually being productive. I learned this the hard way. A few years ago, I went through this phase where I was obsessed with understanding myself. I did personality tests, wrote in journals every day, went to therapy twice a week. And you know what I discovered? That I was anxious, had commitment issues, and struggled with perfectionism. Groundbreaking stuff, right? But here's what actually happened. Instead of fixing these problems, I just became really good at explaining them. I could tell you exactly why I was anxious in any given situation. I could trace my commitment issues back to childhood experiences. I could analyze my perfectionism from 17 different angles. But I was still anxious, still scared of commitment, still a perfectionist. Nothing actually changed except now I had a bunch of fancy labels for my problems. And that's the first dark side of self-awareness. It can become a substitute for actual change. You feel like you're making progress because you're learning things about yourself. But learning isn't the same as growing. It's like reading a book about how to swim. Sure, you'll understand the mechanics of swimming. You'll know exactly what you're supposed to do. But that doesn't mean you can actually swim. You have to get in the water. You have to actually practice. And that's the part most people skip. Then there's the second dark side. And this one's even worse. Self-awareness can turn you into your own worst enemy. See, when you become hyper-aware of your flaws and weaknesses, you start treating yourself like a problem that needs to be fixed. You become this internal critic that never shuts up. You'll be in a conversation and you'll hear yourself talking and think, God, why did I say that? That was so stupid. Or you'll be working on something and constantly judge yourself for not being good enough, fast enough, smart enough. It's exhausting. And it kills your confidence. Because confidence doesn't come from understanding all your weaknesses. It comes from focusing on your strengths and taking action despite your weaknesses. But when you're too self-aware, you can't do that. You're too busy cataloging every mistake, every flaw, every imperfection. And this leads to something psychologists call rumination. It's when you get stuck in these loops of negative thinking about yourself. You just replay the same thoughts over and over, analyzing them from every angle, but never actually moving forward. I've seen people spend years in therapy, becoming more and more self-aware, but also becoming more and more depressed. Because they're not using that awareness to change. They're using it to beat themselves up. Here's another thing people don't talk about. Self-awareness can actually kill your authenticity. Sounds crazy, right? Because isn't self-awareness supposed to make you more authentic? But think about it. When you're constantly monitoring yourself, constantly analyzing your behavior, you stop being spontaneous. You stop being natural. Everything becomes this calculated performance. You're in a social situation, and instead of just being present, you're thinking, am I being too quiet? Am I talking too much? Did that joke land? Do they like me? And in that moment, you're not actually connecting with anyone. You're just performing. You're playing this character of who you think you should be based on all this self-knowledge you've accumulated. Real authenticity comes from not thinking about it. It comes from just being yourself without all this internal commentary. Have you ever noticed that your best moments, your most genuine connections, happen when you're not thinking about yourself at all? When you're just in the flow, fully present, not analyzing anything? That's not a coincidence. Self-awareness pulls you out of those moments. It makes you an observer of your own life instead of a participant. And here's something that really gets me. The self-help industry has convinced us that more self-awareness is always better, that you can never be too self-aware, but that's complete nonsense. You absolutely can be too self-aware, just like you can drink too much water or exercise too much. There's this sweet spot where you know yourself well enough to make good decisions, but not so well that you're paralyzed by analysis. And most people blow right past that sweet spot. They keep digging deeper and deeper, thinking they'll find some magical insight that'll change everything. But you know what they find instead? More problems, more issues, more things to worry about. Because here's a secret. You could spend your entire life trying to understand yourself, and you'd never be done. There's always another layer, another trauma, another pattern to uncover. It's an endless rabbit hole. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your whole life down there, missing out on actually living. Now let me tell you about the comparison trap. This is where self-awareness gets really dangerous. When you become super aware of your own limitations, you also become aware of how much better everyone else seems to be. You see other people who appear more confident, more successful, more put together. And because you know all your own flaws in excruciating detail, you assume they don't have any. Or at least, not as many as you. This creates this warped perspective where everyone else seems to have their life figured out while you're just this mess who can't get it together. But that's not reality. That's just what happens when you compare your internal experience with everyone else's external appearance. Other people aren't more put together than you. They're just less aware of their own dysfunction. Or they're better at hiding it. And honestly, sometimes ignorance really is bliss. Sometimes not knowing all your flaws and weaknesses is actually an advantage, because it lets you take action without second-guessing yourself. It lets you be confident even when maybe you shouldn't be. And sometimes that misplaced confidence is exactly what you need to succeed. I'm not saying you should be delusional, but there's something to be said for having a slightly inflated view of yourself. It gives you the courage to try things you might otherwise avoid. Think about successful people you know. Most of them aren't the most self-aware people in the room. They're the most action-oriented people in the room. They're not sitting around analyzing themselves. They're out there doing things, making mistakes, learning from experience rather than introspection. And this brings me to what might be the biggest dark side of all. Self-awareness can become an excuse. When you know exactly why you do something, it's easy to justify it. Oh, I procrastinate because of my childhood trauma. I can't commit because of my attachment style. I'm anxious because of my brain chemistry. And sure, all of that might be true. But it doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to control you. But when you're too self-aware, it's tempting to let it. Because then you're not responsible. It's not your fault. It's just who you are, based on all these factors you've identified. This is dangerous because it robs you of your agency. It turns you into a victim of your own psychology. And look, I get it. It's comforting to understand why you are the way you are. It makes you feel less alone, less broken. But at some point, you have to stop explaining yourself and start changing yourself. And that requires less awareness and more action. So what's the solution here? How do you use self-awareness without falling into these traps? First, you need to set a timer on your introspection. Don't spend hours journaling and analyzing yourself every day. Give yourself a set amount of time, then move on. Second, for every insight you have about yourself, immediately come up with one action you can take. Don't just collect self-knowledge, use it. Third, remember that awareness is just the first step. It's not the destination. The goal isn't to understand yourself perfectly. The goal is to live a better life. Fourth, balance self-awareness with self-compassion. When you notice something about yourself, don't immediately judge it. Just observe it neutrally, like you would observe the weather. And finally, spend less time in your head and more time in the world. Connect with people, try new things, take risks. Because real growth happens through experience, not through analysis. The truth is, you don't need to understand yourself completely to live a good life. You just need to know yourself well enough to make decent decisions and then be willing to adjust based on what happens. Everything else is just noise. It's just your brain trying to create the illusion of control by analyzing everything to death. But life isn't something you figure out. It's something you live. And the more time you spend trying to understand it, the less time you have to actually experience it. So yeah, self-awareness isn't this magical solution everyone makes it out to be. It's a tool. And like any tool, it can be used well or poorly. Use it to identify patterns that aren't serving you, then take action to change them. Don't use it to endlessly analyze yourself until you're paralyzed by self-knowledge. Because at the end of the day, nobody's going to remember how self-aware you were. They're going to remember what you did, how you made them feel, what you created in the world. And none of that comes from sitting alone analyzing yourself. It comes from getting out there and actually living. Subscribe if this hit different.